Just wanted to do a quick lesson today on hinge bars and also pivot bars and also partial bars as well. Hinge bars usually refer to bars or barres that where you're barring some of the strings but not necessarily the others, and most often you're barring the treble strings and then you're going to grab a bass string afterwards, or for some reason you need an open bass string and so you can't bar all of the strings, but you need, like, for example, the top two strings barred, but you need an open string in the bass, so you can't bar all of them, and for some reason in the piece maybe it's awkward to use two fingers, so you end up doing kind of a bar that's a hinge. So you're not actually barring all six strings, you're just barring the top strings, and then if necessary afterwards you can put the bar down or grab a bass note immediately after that hinge bar. So of course in this situation, if you can do just a smaller bar, that's great, right? Like if you need that open string, you can just play a small bar. The point of a hinge bar though is what's coming after the barre, right? So it's like with a small bar, if I was going like this but I need a B afterwards, I would have to jump my finger up in kind of an erratic movement, letting go of these notes, so it would be kind of like, it just wouldn't be smooth, it wouldn't be legato, it wouldn't be sustained. With a hinge bar though, you can just like throw that next note down. So it's a real lifesaver in very particular situations. So you won't see it very much in your music. You probably won't see it at all in early repertoire, but in later repertoire, you'll definitely see it. Most of the time, hinge bars are going to extend across all of the strings, but not necessarily touch all the strings, right? So that's the difference, is that usually it's going to be a full bar, but you'll just be touching some of the strings and then coming down later for something else. But it really depends on the situation. If the thing that comes after the hinge bar is only on the fifth string, like in the example that I showed, then when you're doing your open bar there, or your hinge bar, and the next one is on the B, then you only need to do 5 strings. So it really depends on what's coming after the hinge bar. I was just looking at an example in my Vice suite here, which I'll be publishing soon. So for example, I'm playing along here, and then I have a bass with C and an open E, and then an F on the first string, and then I have to play the B with my first finger right afterwards. If I didn't use the bar, I would have to go like this. I'd be sustaining that note, and then I would have to try to jump my finger over, but it wouldn't be smooth. It wouldn't sound very, very smooth. It's really hard to let go of a string and then grab a whole bar, especially if the music's moving fast. So in this particular example, it makes more sense to do a hinge bar and then smoothly move into the next thing. It's just like it covers up that lack of sustain a little bit. And it's pretty smooth, right? I've even used hinge bars sometimes when there's like a big shift coming up afterwards, after something. Particularly a shift like into a barre. So like if I have to play a C chord, and then I have to jump up and play the C chord here, that can be really awkward if you're holding a note here, to get the barre. So I'll sometimes do something weird, like I'll do a hinge bar to make the jump into the next barre a little bit easier. So I'm already kind of doing a barre when I hit that C. Now, let's talk now about pivot bars. Pivot bars are kind of similar to hinge bars, but they're a little bit different. A pivot bar is usually something that you're pivoting into, like literally, you're not barring, and then you are barring. So for example, in my Vice Suite here, I've got this section where I'm playing a low F, and then I need it with a low F with an open E, and then it resolves to the F on the top note. But I don't want to be reaching out to the E way over here, so I need that open string, and then I didn't want to use my second finger because there's some other stuff I have to get afterwards, so I need a barre. So I'm playing, and then I pivot into a bar. This allows me to sustain this low voice. Do you see how you can hear the F ringing, the low F, the bass note? And then you can hear the top note, and so you don't lose the sustain of the bass. You get to actually properly sustain the bass voice while playing an open string and then a fretted barre note. So that's a pivot bar. Pivoting in, and then sometimes we also pivot out immediately afterwards. In this particular piece, I have little... So this is a particularly hard one because I'm barring up here, and then I need the open F, or open E with the F, and then the closed F, and then a G, and then a C. So it's incredibly helpful in that particular spot to just pivot into a barre. One early example of the pivot bar comes in like the RCM grade 3 book with that Tarrega piece, which is also on my site. You can get the sheet music for free. But that study in C by Tarrega, there's a part in the second half of the piece where you're playing a C chord, and then you pivot into a bar, and then out again. So the indications are like pivot, bar 1, pivot, open string. If you tried to do that with the first finger, you can't hold on to the C and you can't jump your finger smoothly, so it's kind of impossible. So the pivot bar really saves you in situations like that. The only other thing I want to talk about is partial bars, and I call these partial bars. I don't know what other people call them actually. It's when you're barring some strings, but not others. So in particular, when you're not barring all of the treble strings, but just some of the upper strings. So for example, if you're playing an A chord, but you have an open E string, high E string underneath it, that's another type of hinge bar, I guess, or I call it like a partial bar. I'm not sure. Maybe someone out there knows there's a specific name for it, but I don't know if there's a lot of terminology. I think it's just called a barre with an open string underneath it. The Royal Conservatory has their little fraction bars that tell you how many strings of the bar to bar, which implies like sometimes you're doing that while letting an open string ring out. One last thing I'll say is that use these techniques sparingly. Like, you don't usually need to use these techniques very often. Hinge bars are fairly rare. Pivot bars are somewhat common, but don't go home and try to add them to your repertoire. They're not that often. They're not used that often, and also they're like a weird technique sometimes. Like, it's not great for your hand positions always. So it's usually not introduced until around the grade 3, 4. Or more realistically, like the grade 6 level onward. So that's like late intermediate level stuff. You might find it in a couple of little pieces in grade 3 and 4, but really it's like it's a more advanced technique, and it has to do with specific musical reasons to do it, where you need to sustain notes or accomplish some kind of fingering. So don't try to just add it everywhere. Instead, use it at specific times for specific reasons. And when you really need that sustain out of certain notes or a smoother fingering to avoid some kind of awkward radical jump in your hand.